My name is Rowenna, and I thought family reunions were supposed to be a time for love and support. I had been preparing for this family gathering for weeks. I bought the best dishes, spent hours getting the kids ready, and made sure my outfit was perfect. This year, I was determined to make everything go smoothly. No drama, no awkwardness, just a simple, pleasant day with my family. At least that's what I had convinced myself of, but the moment I stepped into my parents' house, I knew something was off. The air was thick with tension. Everyone was standing around the dining room table, but the usual chatter and laughter were missing. Instead, I heard my dad's voice louder than usual. His words were sharp, cutting through the silence like a knife. "I'm proud of all my kids," he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. "Except that one." I froze at the door, my breath caught in my chest. That one. I knew exactly who he was talking about. Me. I looked around at my siblings, but none of them met my eyes. They were all too busy pretending they didn't hear. But I heard it. And it was loud. I was the disappointment. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I could feel my stomach drop like I was falling into some dark, painful hole. I hadn't expected this, not here, not today. But there it was. The truth my father had never been brave enough to say directly to my face until now. My dad didn't even look at me when he said it. His back was turned, focused on something else. The words hung in the air, thick with judgment and rejection. I wanted to say something, anything, to defend myself, but I couldn't. My voice betrayed me, leaving me standing there in a stunned silence. "Dad, what do you mean?" The words escaped me, though I barely recognized my own voice. It sounded weak, hesitant. He finally turned around, and his eyes met mine, cold, distant. "You know exactly what I mean. You've never done anything worthwhile with your life, Rowenna. Always chasing some dream, always disappointing. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but instead, I just stood there, paralyzed. In front of the entire family, I was nothing more than a failure. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, my heart beating in my chest like it might explode. I couldn't stay there another second. Not with that look in his eyes, not with his words hanging in the air like a heavy weight. I didn't know where I was going as I walked out of my parents' house. My legs were moving on autopilot, my head full of confusion and rage. I found myself standing in the driveway, gasping for air like I hadn't been breathing properly all day. Failure. That word echoed in my mind over and over again, like an incessant drumbeat I couldn't escape. I reached for my phone and texted my best friend Samira. "I need to talk. Now." Samira had always been the one person I could talk to without feeling judged, the one who knew all my flaws and still accepted me. But today, as I sat in the car and waited for her response, I couldn't help but feel like I was drowning in the overwhelming shame my father had thrown at me. The message came through quickly. "I'm on my way. Don't go anywhere." I didn't. Wait. I just drove. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away. I didn't want to go back inside, not after what my dad had said. I had always felt like I was never enough for him, like I was constantly chasing something I couldn't catch. But hearing him say it so openly, it shattered something inside me. I ended up at the park, one of my old favorite spots. I used to come here when I needed a moment to clear my head, back before the weight of adulthood and family responsibilities consumed me. The sky was overcast, a slight drizzle falling from the heavens, as if the world itself felt the weight of my broken heart. Samira arrived a few minutes later, parking her car next to mine. She didn't ask any questions. She just sat down beside me and put an arm around my shoulder. Her silence spoke volumes, but it was the comfort I needed. "I'm so sorry, Rowenna," she said softly, her voice gentle. That's not fair. You don't deserve that. Not from him, not from anyone." I let out a shaky breath, finally allowing the tears to come. "I don't know what's wrong with me, Samira. Why can't I ever be enough? No matter how hard I try, it's never good enough. It's like I'm invisible, like I don't matter." "You do matter," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "You matter to me. You matter to your friends. And you matter to yourself, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. You don't need his approval to be whole. You're already whole, Rowenna, and you've always been." Her words were the balm my wounded soul needed, but they didn't make the pain go away. The hurt was still raw, still fresh. I had spent so much of my life trying to gain my father's approval, trying to be the person he wanted me to be. But now, with those words cutting through me, I realized something. I had been living for him, for everyone else, and never for myself. I wiped my eyes and looked at Samira. "I don't know where to go from here. I'm not sure I can keep pretending everything is okay. I don't even know who I am anymore, Samira." "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Samira said. "But you can start with one thing. Start with you. Live for yourself. Not for anyone else. Not for what they expect from you. You don't owe anyone your happiness." I took in her words slowly, letting them settle inside me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone. The next few days passed in a blur. I avoided my family's calls. I didn't want to hear any more excuses, any more words that would make me feel small. I didn't want to explain myself to anyone. I just wanted peace. I threw myself into my work, pushing myself harder than usual, trying to drown out the pain with productivity. But no matter how much I worked, the weight of my father's words still lingered. I could feel the burn of his rejection at every turn. It wasn't just about the reunion anymore. It was about the years of trying to prove myself, only to be dismissed. I had spent so much time trying to be who my family wanted me to be, and in the end, I'd forgotten who I was. That afternoon, as I sat at my desk, I received an email from my manager. It was a project I'd been working on for weeks, one that I'd put all my effort into, and it was finally ready to be presented. The email simply said, "Great job, Rowenna. This is exactly what we needed. I'll be presenting it to the board next week." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of pride. I had accomplished something on my own, and it mattered. My heart lifted just a little bit. It wasn't my father's approval, but it was something. A reminder that I was capable, that I had value, that I mattered outside of my family's expectations. I picked up the phone and called Samira. I needed to talk. I needed to share this small victory, no matter how insignificant it felt compared to the chaos in my heart. "Hey, it's done," I said when she answered. "The project is finished, and they loved it." "I knew you'd kill it," Samira said, her voice full of warmth. "You're amazing, Rowenna. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I leaned back in my chair, letting the compliments sink in. For the first time in a while, I allowed myself to bask in it, even just for a moment. I was doing something right. The next morning, I decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my head and make sense of everything that had been swirling around in my mind. As I walked through the park, I let the quiet settle around me. The chirping of birds, the soft rustle of leaves, the peacefulness of it all. It felt like I was reconnecting with something I had lost along the way. I passed by a bench where an older woman sat, reading a book. She smiled at me as I walked past, and for some reason, I felt a connection. I stopped, turned, and smiled back. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I said, feeling the need to engage, even in the simplest way. "It is," she replied, closing her book and meeting my gaze. "What's on your mind, dear? You look like you've got a lot on your shoulders." I hesitated for a moment, but something about her kindness made me open up. "I'm just trying to figure out where I'm going," I said softly. "I've spent so long trying to live up to everyone else's expectations, and I'm starting to realize I don't even know what I want anymore." She nodded, as if she had heard this story 1,000 times before. "It's hard to find yourself when you're constantly running after what others want. But you'll get there. You're already on your way. It's never too late to live for yourself." Her words were simple, but they hit me hard. For the first time in a long while, I felt like someone understood what I was going through. Someone who wasn't trying to fix me, but simply offering a bit of wisdom. I walked away from the park that day with a renewed sense of purpose. It was time to stop living for them. It was time to start living for me. The weeks that followed felt like a new chapter in my life, one that I had been waiting for but was too scared to start. I was learning to let go of the constant need for my family's approval. It was hard at first. Some days, it felt like the old patterns of doubt and guilt would resurface, but I had something now that I hadn't had before: clarity. I knew what I needed to do. I was starting to understand that I had the power to define my own life. The first major change came when I finally mustered up the courage to attend my company's annual conference. I'd always held myself back from taking on leadership roles, always telling myself I wasn't ready, that others were more qualified. But this time, something in me shifted. I signed up to present one of the key projects I'd been working on. For the first time, I wasn't seeking validation from anyone. I was doing this for myself, to prove that I could. The day of the conference, I walked into the auditorium with my head held high. It was strange feeling that way. For years, I had walked into spaces like this with a sense of fear, hoping no one would notice me, praying I wouldn't make a mistake. But today was different. I was ready. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath, looked out at the crowd, and shared my presentation. I didn't rush through it. I didn't second-guess myself. For once, I was fully present, confident in my ability to stand in front of a room full of people and own my accomplishments. The response was overwhelming. People approached me afterward to congratulate me, asking questions about the project and sharing their thoughts. I couldn't help but smile, realizing how far I had come. I had finally stopped hiding. After the conference, I felt a sense of pride and satisfaction that was new to me. I wasn't seeking approval from my family or anyone else. I was doing what I loved, and I was succeeding on my own terms. But there was still the matter of my family. After the reunion, I didn't want to go back to the same toxic patterns. I had been avoiding their calls, unsure of how to face them. The last thing I wanted was another confrontation with my dad. I didn't need him to see me as a success to be worthy, but as I thought about it more, I realized that avoiding them wasn't the answer. I needed closure. I needed to have an honest conversation, not for their sake, but for mine. So, I reached out. I called my dad, and for the first time, I didn't try to make excuses or justify my actions. I simply said, "We need to talk. I can't keep carrying this weight anymore. I need you to hear me." A week later, I drove to his house. My heart was pounding the entire way there. What was I expecting? I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't go on pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't keep running away from the family that had always made me feel like I was never enough. When I walked into the house, the tension in the air was thick. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I was done being afraid. We sat down at the kitchen table, the silence between us heavy. My dad finally spoke. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Rowenna. I don't know how to show it. I didn't know how to let go of my expectations." I looked him in the eyes. I spent so many years trying to live up to those expectations, and it nearly broke me. "I can't do that anymore, Dad. I can't keep pretending to be something I'm not for you, for anyone. I'm enough, just as I am." There was a long pause. My dad didn't respond immediately, but I didn't need him to. What mattered was that I had said it. I had stood up for myself. "I'm sorry, Rowenna," he finally said, his voice quieter. "I see that now. I just wanted the best for you, but I didn't realize I was hurting you by holding on so tight." I nodded. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I had hoped for. But it was a start. It was a moment of vulnerability, something I had never experienced with my dad before. The conversation with my dad was a turning point, but it didn't immediately fix everything. I left his house that day with a sense of quiet resolve. Knew this wasn't going to be an instant reconciliation. There would still be moments of tension. Old patterns that had been built up over years weren't going to vanish overnight. But something inside me had changed. I had spoken my truth, and I had stood up for myself in a way I hadn't done in years. Over the next few weeks, I focused on what I could control: my work, my personal growth, and my kids. I became more intentional about my time. I took on new projects, ones that excited me, that pushed me to grow in ways I hadn't expected. I started picking up the pieces of my life that had been left behind for so long, the things I had put on hold because I didn't feel worthy of them. I spent more time with my kids, playing with them, talking to them. I wanted them to see me as someone who wasn't just a helper or a caretaker, but as someone who lived authentically. I wanted them to understand that it was okay to be yourself, no matter what anyone else thought. I wanted them to learn that their worth didn't depend on the approval of others. As I became more attuned to my own needs, I started making changes in my daily routine. I signed up for a personal development course I'd been eyeing for months, something I had always told myself I didn't have time for. I started setting boundaries with my family. No more walking on eggshells, no more biting my tongue just to avoid conflict. I learned to say no when I needed to, and yes to things that truly mattered. And then, a few weeks after the family reunion, I received a call from my dad. His voice was softer this time. "Rowenna," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said. I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I don't say it enough, but I am." Those words, simple as they were, hit me harder than I expected. Proud of me. It was the first time in my life I had heard those words without feeling like I had to earn them. Without feeling like I had to jump through hoops to prove myself, I sat quietly for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. I meant it. The rest of the conversation wasn't about apologies or blame. It was just two people finally understanding each other. He asked about the kids, about my work, and for the first time, it didn't feel like an interrogation. It felt like a father showing genuine interest in his daughter's life. We didn't have a perfect relationship after that day, but we had something more important. A foundation. A foundation built on honesty, vulnerability, and, slowly, trust. I knew that rebuilding relationships was a long process, but this was a start. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to let him see who I was. The days passed, and life started to feel different. I wasn't waiting for my father's approval anymore. I wasn't chasing after something that felt out of reach. Instead, I was moving forward at my own pace, carving out a life that felt authentic and right for me. I kept busy with work, but it wasn't just about the projects anymore. It was about the passion behind what I was doing. I had started to feel a sense of pride in my work that I hadn't known before, as if I wasn't doing it to prove something to someone else, but because it was mine. Still, there were moments when the old wounds resurfaced. I found myself questioning if I was doing enough. Was I a good enough mother? A good enough friend? Was I truly living my life on my own terms? And those fears, those doubts would creep in, especially late at night when I was alone with my thoughts. But I started to realize something important. Those doubts weren't mine. They were the voices I had inherited over the years. The ones that told me I wasn't enough, the ones that made me feel like I had to be perfect. But perfection was never the goal. The goal was to be me, unfiltered and unapologetically real. One evening, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. It was one of those quiet nights where the air felt fresh and the world seemed to slow down for just a moment. As I walked, I thought about all the changes I had made, how much I had grown, and how much more I still had to learn. I thought about my dad, how, despite everything, we had begun to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy. We still had our struggles, still had our moments of misunderstanding, but there was something different now. I wasn't trying to mold myself to fit his vision. I was showing him who I truly was. And for the first time, he was starting to accept that. And then, as I passed by the park, I saw a family having a picnic. They were laughing, talking, and enjoying each other's company. And for a brief moment, I felt a pang of sadness. Why couldn't we be like that? Why couldn't my family just be simple and happy without all the emotional baggage? But then I stopped. I wasn't that girl anymore. I wasn't the one who felt like I needed to fit into everyone else's mold. I didn't need my family's approval to feel complete. I was already enough. I walked back home, the evening air, still cool on my skin. And as I entered my house, I realized something. I had stopped waiting for anyone to validate me. I had stopped looking outside myself for the answers, for the approval, for the love I had been seeking for so long. I was building my own love, my own sense of worth. The days that followed felt like a quiet but steady momentum. I had stopped looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was making the right decisions. I was no longer seeking validation from anyone, least of all from my father or the expectations I had once carried so heavily. There were moments, of course, when I felt a twinge of doubt, when old patterns crept back in. But I learned to let those thoughts pass, like clouds floating by on a windy day. They didn't define me anymore. I wasn't the failure my father had labeled me. I was stronger than that. One afternoon, I received a call from my dad. It wasn't something I expected, but when I saw his name on the screen, I hesitated. I had been avoiding him, not out of anger, but because I knew the conversation would matter. I knew I was ready for it, but I wasn't sure if he was. "Rowenna," he said, his voice softer than it had been in months. "I've been thinking about everything, about you, and about the way I treated you for so long. I realize I never gave you the room to just be yourself. I've held on to expectations that were unfair to you. I'm sorry." I didn't say anything right away. I wasn't sure what to say, but the words, "I'm sorry," coming from him, felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't a magical fix. It wasn't an overnight healing process, but it was a start. "I've spent so many years trying to meet your expectations, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "But I've realized that I can't keep doing that. I'm living my life now for me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost feel his internal struggle. "I know, Rowenna," he finally said. "I see that now. I've always been proud of you, even when I didn't know how to show it." I closed my eyes, letting those words sink in. Maybe it wasn't the apology I had always hoped for, but it was enough. For the first time in my life, I could feel that my father was seeing me for who I truly was. Not a reflection of his expectations, but just me. Rowenna. "I'm still figuring this out, Dad," I said, my voice softer now. "But I'm moving forward, and I want you to be a part of that, if you can, but only as me, not as the person you wanted me to be." There was silence again, but it was different this time, gentler, more understanding. "I understand, Rowenna. I'll try." It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect, but it was progress. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't need perfection. I just needed peace. As I hung up the phone, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the years of emotional struggle begin to lift. I was free now, not because I had finally earned my father's approval, but because I had finally given myself permission to be enough. The next few months were filled with small victories, moments where I took control of my life, where I made decisions based on my own needs and desires. I no longer cared if my family didn't understand. I no longer cared if they judged me. I was living for me, and that was enough. And in those quiet moments, when I looked around at the life I had built, my career, my kids, my friendships, I felt a sense of contentment, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. I was enough.